To focus now on what issues may affect the party campaigns going into the last weekend, we're now joined by Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to all three of you.
Hi, Michael.
So listen, as I said, looking into the stories that may affect this final weekend, and I need to begin here with Mark Carney, right? Because we know that Radio-Canada yesterday basically comes out with a story saying that Donald Trump did raise the issue of 51st State when the two of them had a conversation last month that was not referenced by Carney. And here he is, talking about how positive that phone call was. It has led the NDP and the Bloc Québécois essentially raising questions about how well Mr. Carney can be trusted. Is this a case of the Liberals hobbling themselves right before they hit the finish line, Bob?
Well, I don't think it is. I think people have pretty much made up their minds. This is not an issue that's going to move people. First of all, it's a bit confusing to begin with. Mr. Carney could have been much more forthcoming when he spoke to us after that March 28th meeting. But we also in the media have a role to play in this too, because we didn't do our job very well. I think we were all stuck by the fact that the President referred to Mr. Carney as the Prime Minister, how it was a really good conversation, and we weren't used to that from Mr. Trump, who had already been belittling Justin Trudeau all the time. And I think what we should have said, and we should have pushed him hard on, did he mention the 51st state? And nobody really pushed him on that, so he didn't volunteer. And now we know that it was raised, because what all he said was, well, he respected our sovereignty. Which he really didn't in a way, because he raised the 51st state. So, but this is not an issue that's going to have a big effect on the electorate.
Okay, not an issue. And to your point, the reason why the NDP and the Bloc are raising this is because they're looking for any, dent in the armor to try to get some advantage going into this final weekend. What do you make of the impact of this revelation, Tonda?
Well, won't surprise you, I'm going to disagree with Bob.
That's why we invite you.
I think that it may not affect anyone's vote, but that's not to say that there's not a legitimate question, I think, to be asked about his willingness to be transparent in that case. And yes, perhaps the exact questions weren't asked in some exact prosecutorial way to elicit that answer. But it was I was in a news conference with him that next day, and we were distinctly left with a different impression. And I have seen this on a couple of occasions with Mr. Carney, where he's prepared to be evasive if it's politically expedient, and that's not a trait I think that is a great one to have. And so I think that for the Conservatives, it may strengthen, though, the impressions that are already held within their support base. I agree with Bob in respect of it doesn't necessarily change a big swing in the vote at this stage, because it also gave Trump, or rather Carney, another ability to trumpet his ability to deal with Trump. But I don't like that tendency of his.
Okay, Joël-Denis?
Imagine a second if that revelation had come before the debate. This would have been one of the big issues raised during that debate in French or in English by the Bloc Québécois, the NDP, or even Pierre Poilievre. So I think it's a matter of transparency. I think that Mr. Carney did not come up with the full story. We didn't see anything about that in the readout, and I agree with Bob. Maybe we should have done. Did Mr. Trump raise specifically the 51st state in the conversation?
A lesson for all of us to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't trust that guy.
Yeah.
Be careful what he says.
Or be suspicious. Double check, triple check, or
demand transparency. I
so
was
it's not a lesson for us.
Well, when I heard him yesterday dance around and try to explain it away, but finally be forced to admit that yes, it was he did say this. I went back to his book where he talked about leadership and what makes a good leader, and one of the top traits is transparency, accountability, be clear, admit your mistakes, all of the things he did not do yesterday. And so I thought, hypocrisy doesn't look good on any politician, so yeah.
But whether or not it affects it very quickly.
We're learning what type of politician Mr. Carney will be, because he's brand new at that game. So we're trying to figure out where does he stand on some stuff. How should we interpret interpret some of his answers? Should we ask him more questions about some topics? So it's a learning experience for us.
Yeah,
So
100%. Like I wrote that last week. His education as a politician is our education as an electorate. We are learning who he is as Prime Minister. And, he may well end up with a majority government after Monday or a minority government. But now I think that we all have learned a big lesson here.
Okay, well, let's switch over because one politician Conservatives know very well is Pierre Poilievre. And just a few days ago, we saw the Nova Scotia Premier, Tim Houston, a progressive Conservative. He released a video onto social media. Basically, it invited speculation about an early bid to try to be the next federal leader of the Conservative Party. And to that, the Ontario Premier was asked about, is this what's happening? Take a listen to what we heard from Doug Ford.
People are interpreting it as maybe dipping his toe in the waters of testing a potential future CPC leadership bid. What do you think of that?
I love. Well, something. Let's see what happens. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, and let's see what happens on the 28th.
Okay, so let's see what happens. But are we actually seeing animosity between the premiers of Ontario and Nova Scotia, again, both progressive Conservatives, against Pierre Poilievre, Bob?
Yeah, we sure are. I mean, but it's Pierre Poilievre's fault. Here's a guy who never reached out after became leader of the Conservative Party to reach out to Doug Ford, who was a very popular figure in this province, did not want anything to do with him because he wasn't right-wing enough. We know they didn't want to have anything to do with Premier Houston at all because he's a progressive Conservative. They didn't want to have anything to do with Jean Charest, who is a former Premier of Quebec and one hell of a good campaigner. Imagine if Jean Charest was campaigning for them in Quebec and Tim Houston was campaigning for them in Nova Scotia and Doug Ford was campaigning for them in Ontario. It would be an entirely different picture. In 1984, Brian Mulroney had Bill Davis went and introduced him at every rally in Ontario, every rally. Because what did Brian Mulroney want to do? He wanted to build a big tent. Mr. Poilievre and Jenni Byrne, they don't want a big tent. They only want a conservative, hard right conservative tent, and they're going to pay the price for it. 90 ridings where it was held by Ms. Byrne and Mr. Poilievre for their own selection. So people who believe in grassroots democracy at the local level, they got shut out. And those people are very angry.
Yeah, well, and John DeYoung famously wanted to run for the Conservatives of British Columbia, now running as independent, former finance minister. What do you make of
this? Split the vote, the Conservative vote out there, and he may win it as an independent, whereas he could have been a Conservative MP. No, and on that point, I do agree with Bob. Like this is an extraordinary unfolding of a fight within the tent, and it's not just Mr. Ford, you caught his grin there, and he emphasized to you yesterday that I'm a progressive Conservative.
I interviewed him yesterday in Toronto.
But this is not just a fight between progressive and red Tory, blue Tory. This fight, certainly in Ontario, is a fight between sort of the campaign manager for Doug Ford and the campaign manager for Jenni Byrne, are both of the original United Conservative Movement family, and it's a more deeply personal feud going on in that case. And they've blown up the bridges with the Nova Scotia Conservatives now because, they weren't doing as they were told, supporting Mr. Poilievre. So this is bad all around for them, and I think they'll pay a price. I do agree.
Yeah,
it's quite a spectacular family feud that we're witnessing among the Conservatives and the Progressive. And
with a few days left in a vote.
Yeah, exactly. And in politics, everybody says that you need to addition, you need to add on. And what Monsieur Poilievre over the last 2 years, and with the help of Jenni Byrne, they've been subtracting. And if you can afford to subtract Doug Ford from the equation, you're doomed to hit a wall. And that's what will probably happen in Ontario. Ontario is the critical province, as we repeat on every election. It remains so. If you can't succeed in Ontario, you're doomed to finish your the election night on the opposition benches, and that's probably the scenario that awaits the Conservative Party.
122 seats. I mean, majorities will be made there. So
yeah, governments are built, majorities made, absolutely. So that said, let's fast forward to election night, Monday. You're going to be a little bit on our program, so I appreciate that, Bob. Talk to us about what you're watching out for between now and election night.
Well, I'm just watching right now where the candidates are going. Mr. Poilievre seems to be going, well, he's actually spent a lot of time in British Columbia now, but he's also gone into places where they're trying to save seats. Why is he going into Calgary? Why is he going into Saskatoon? The Liberals haven't won a seat in Saskatoon since 1993, but he feels the need to go into Saskatoon.
Because usually these are seats that you can ignore and go elsewhere.
Well, campaigns are usually one where leaders, when they're, if they're playing defense, you're in trouble. And that's not the case with Mr. Carney. He's not playing defense. He's going into ridings that are held by Conservatives and Democrats because he thinks he can take those seats. And that's what I'm watching over the next couple of days. And also, frankly, I get the, if you're watching Poilievre, particularly yesterday, I found he was very dark about what he was talking about.
His energy
and also his message
The message for the last number of days has been a very dystopian one about the future under the Liberals. So, yeah.
And what are you watching
Well, also that, and you know, Pierre Poilievre has not been into Saskatchewan only once since he's been leader. Like, so going there is a clear signal that they see a Liberal, you know, 1 or 2 seats in Saskatchewan. And for them, that takes away a big argument that the Liberals don't represent the whole country. If the Liberals can gain a seat there and gain seats in Alberta, then they potentially have seats all across the country. Undercuts his big argument. So the offense-defense play, but also the messaging. Like, at what point do any of them signal they know their fate? You know, the next few days are just interesting from anyone who's a political junkie, you know, the campaign messaging, the travels, but what lies ahead? You know, what lies ahead next week potentially? Well, first of all, it's the start of dramatic trade talks and potentially 2 leadership challenges from within their parties or from outside their parties for the losers.
Yeah, Joël-Denis?
Obviously, I'll be watching where the leaders are going, but also whether Mr. Carney will come out and clearly claim or demand a clear national strong mandate from voters. And that has yet to be made. He started a bit in that sense. I think he doesn't want to project overconfidence. He wants to be as, you know, cool as possible. But that's going to be an interesting call to make, because I think in the current context, while we're facing threats from the United States, I would argue that we need a stable government in Ottawa, whether it's a conservative one or a liberal one, so that they can make decisions and not be worried about political shenanigans in the House of Commons, whether they're going to survive 18 months and we're going to be back at it in less than 2 years. So that's what I'll be watching, mostly Mr. Carney, whether he's going to make the call for a strong majority.
Okay, so whether or not he makes that call, Joël-Denis, Tonda, thank you for that. And Bob, since you're going to be here Monday, I can tell you what is coming up. Pizza at 5, sandwiches midnight. So we'll have that for you while you're here.
No coffee? No coffee?
Oh my God, that's intravenous. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for this.
Thank you.